What happens when a hardworking man is denied a chance just because of the color of his skin? What if karma had a plan of its own? These words are more than just a question. They are the reality many face every day in workplaces around the world. A reality where effort, talent, and dedication take a backseat to prejudice and bias. Imagine waking up every morning, putting in your best effort, and constantly being overlooked for the one thing you've worked so hard to achieve: a promotion. Now imagine this isn't just a bad week or a bad boss. It's a pattern. It's a system that's been stacked against you from the very start. Your skin color becomes a barrier, not your skills, not your hard work. This is the story of a man who dared to dream big, who believed that the workplace could be a fair place for all. But for him, his dream was crushed, not by his lack of talent, but by the color of his skin. What happens next is a story of frustration, but also of hope. A story of how karma eventually finds its way, even when it seems impossible. His name is Marcus, a name that stands for perseverance, dedication, and an unwavering belief in hard work. Every morning he arrives at the office before the sun comes up, ready to tackle the challenges of the day. He's the first one to send emails, the first one to step into meetings, and the last one to leave at night. Marcus is the type of employee every company dreams of, focused, driven, and eager to learn. His passion for his job is visible in everything he does. Whether it's handling complex projects or helping colleagues with their tasks, Marcus pours his heart into his work. His attention to detail is impeccable, and his solutions are always spot on. But it's not just his skills that set him apart. It's his ability to inspire those around him. His coworkers admire him for his work ethic, his problem-solving skills, and most of all, his calm, collected demeanor in the face of challenges. He's the kind of person who makes others want to be better. Despite his exceptional qualifications, Marcus has always remained humble. He never brags about his achievements, but it's clear to everyone that he's more than capable. His resume is flawless, his experience unmatched, and his dedication undeniable. Yet, despite all of this, there's one thing he desperately wants: a promotion. Marcus dreams of stepping into a leadership role where he can inspire others the way he's been inspired. He knows that he has earned it, not just because of his work, but because of the passion and vision he brings to the table. He believes that he can make a difference, bring positive change, and create a more inclusive and successful environment for everyone around him. But as the days pass, his dream seems to slip further and further away. Other colleagues, less qualified, are given opportunities that Marcus has rightfully earned. It's a pattern he can't ignore, and the sting of it cuts deeper each time. Enter Mr. Hawkins, the manager of the department and Marcus's direct superior. On the surface, Mr. Hawkins appears charming, well-dressed, confident, and with a warm handshake for everyone. But beneath that surface lies a different truth. Mr. Hawkins is arrogant, dismissive, and when it comes to Marcus, blatantly biased. While the company prides itself on being diverse and inclusive, Mr. Hawkins seems to forget that when it comes to promotions. He often dismisses Marcus's achievements in subtle ways, making comments that, at first, seem innocent. But the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. Marcus is being judged not by his skills, but by his skin color. For example, after Marcus had successfully completed a major project that saved the company thousands of dollars, Mr. Hawkins gave him a half-hearted compliment. "Good job, Marcus. I guess it's lucky you're so good with numbers. Wouldn't have guessed it from the way you present yourself." The comment was thinly veiled, a backhanded praise that made Marcus feel as though his professionalism was being questioned because of his appearance. On another occasion, when a new position opened up, a role Marcus had been eyeing for months, Mr. Hawkins called in the team for a meeting. The job was a perfect fit for Marcus, but when the time came for nominations, the boss hesitated. "I was thinking someone with a bit more experience, maybe someone who doesn't stand out so much," he said, looking pointedly at Marcus. "Someone a bit more refined." It wasn't the first time Marcus had been passed over for a promotion. He had seen colleagues with less experience or skill promoted, while he remained in the same position. Hawkins always had an excuse. Not quite the right fit for the role, or maybe next time, Marcus, with a tight smile that felt more like a dismissal than encouragement. But it wasn't just the promotions. The bias showed up in meetings as well. When Marcus spoke up with ideas that could improve the department, Mr. Hawkins would often interrupt him, dismissing his suggestions without so much as a second thought. Meanwhile, when others, especially those who fit Mr. Hawkins's ideal image, shared similar ideas, he'd jump at the chance to praise them. "Great idea, John. You're really thinking outside the box." Every time Marcus proved himself, it felt like Mr. Hawkins found a way to minimize his accomplishments, to make sure he stayed at the bottom of the ladder, even when he deserved to climb higher. The constant rejection, the subtle jabs, and the missed opportunities began to wear Marcus down. The realization hit him hard. His hard work wasn't the issue. It was the color of his skin that was holding him back. Weeks turned into months, and Marcus found himself in a relentless cycle. Every time a new opportunity arose, a promotion, a new project, a chance to step up, he found himself passed over. It was as though the more he gave, the more invisible he became. The first major blow came after a company-wide meeting. Mr. Hawkins had announced the promotion of 2 employees, both of whom were less qualified than Marcus. One had barely completed a fraction of the work Marcus had, while the other had only been with the company for a fraction of the time, yet both were chosen for roles that Marcus had been eyeing for months. The reasoning was simple. We felt these 2 would bring a fresh perspective to the team. Marcus had been the one to bring fresh ideas to the table countless times, but no one acknowledged them. He worked tirelessly, day in and day out, delivering results that far exceeded expectations. Yet, time after time, he was told that he wasn't quite the right fit, or the team needs someone with a different skill set. The sting of those words cut deeper each time, but still, Marcus held on to hope, telling himself that the next opportunity would be his. He wasn't one to give up. He worked harder. He stayed later. He learned new skills. He volunteered for more projects. Yet, every time the promotion announcements came around, it was always someone else. It was always the same excuses. One day, Marcus walked into the office to find a new team leader had been chosen, someone who had barely been at the company for 6 months, someone who hadn't even demonstrated the ability to handle the basic tasks Marcus had been successfully managing for years. The team leader, Jessica, smiled awkwardly as she introduced herself to Marcus. "I'm really looking forward to working with you, Marcus," she said, unaware of the storm brewing in his chest. Marcus managed a tight smile, his stomach sinking. How was it that someone so unqualified had been picked for a role that he deserved more than anyone? How could they ignore everything he had contributed? It felt like a slap in the face. The next few weeks were a blur of frustration. Every time Marcus saw his colleagues moving forward, taking on new roles, getting noticed for their work, his anger simmered. He began to feel like a ghost in the office, present but never acknowledged. The weight of his frustration grew heavier. His passion was there, his skills were there, but none of it mattered. He felt trapped in a cycle of rejection that he couldn't escape. One particularly difficult day, Marcus received an email from HR. They had decided to promote someone to a position he had applied for just weeks before. As he read the email, he couldn't help but notice how polite and formal it was. There were no words of encouragement, no acknowledgement of his dedication, just a simple note. "Thank you for your application. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with another candidate." The decision was final. He had been passed over again. It was the last straw. The feeling of rejection was unbearable, but even worse was the realization that his skin color had always been the deciding factor. He wasn't given the chance to prove his worth, not because of his abilities, but because of something he had no control over. Marcus closed his computer, leaned back in his chair, and let out a heavy sigh. His mind raced with thoughts of quitting, thoughts of giving up. But then something inside him shifted. It wasn't defeat that he felt. It was the fire of determination reigniting. He was done waiting for the system to change. He wasn't going to sit quietly and accept the injustice anymore. He had given everything to this company, and if they weren't going to see it, he'd make them see. The weight of the constant rejections was more than Marcus could bear. Each denial, each passing moment of being overlooked, left a deeper scar. The feeling of helplessness had begun to suffocate him. But now, something inside him was changing. A fire began to grow, a fire fueled by years of frustration, but also by a deep-rooted sense of justice. It wasn't the first time he had felt anger toward Mr. Hawkins, but this time it was different. This time he wasn't just angry about his personal setbacks. He was angry about the unfair system that had allowed this to continue. He wasn't going to stand by and let his hard work be erased by prejudice any longer. The decision came one late evening as Marcus was finishing up a project in the office. He sat alone, the glow of his computer screen illuminating the empty room. His mind raced with thoughts of how to expose the truth. How could he make the system see what they were doing? How could he prove the racism that had held him back for so long? Marcus wasn't sure at first, but he knew one thing: he couldn't do it alone. The next day, he reached out to his friend and coworker, Jasmine, a fellow employee who had been with the company for a few years. Jasmine had always been supportive, but over time she too had noticed the disparities in how people of color were treated in the office. "Marcus," she said when he called her, "I've seen how hard you've worked. I've seen how Mr. Hawkins treats you. It's not right. You deserve more." Jasmine's words struck a chord in Marcus's heart. It was the first time someone had openly acknowledged what he had been going through. For so long he had bottled up his feelings, afraid that speaking out would make him seem weak or like he was complaining. But now he felt heard, and with that, a sense of validation washed over him. "We need to expose this," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the frustration that still boiled inside him. "I can't keep living like this. I've been passed over too many times. I've worked my ass off, and they just keep ignoring me. It's time to make them listen." Jasmine was on board immediately. She had witnessed the injustice firsthand, and she knew something had to be done. Together they started gathering evidence, documenting the instances of favoritism, the subtle yet undeniable racial biases that Mr. Hawkins exhibited. It wasn't easy. They had to be careful, working in the shadows to avoid drawing attention to their plan. They kept track of every promotion Marcus had been denied, every meeting where Mr. Hawkins made biased comments, and every instance where Marcus's ideas were dismissed or ignored. They even spoke to other coworkers who had witnessed similar patterns of unfair treatment, though many were hesitant to speak out, fearful of retaliation. But slowly Marcus and Jasmine built a case, one that showed a clear pattern of discrimination. As the weeks passed, Marcus felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The work was exhausting, but it gave him purpose again. He wasn't just sitting back and accepting his fate. He was fighting back. And with each piece of evidence they gathered, he could feel the walls that had been built around him starting to crack. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus felt empowered. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. He wasn't going to let Mr. Hawkins or anyone else take away his dignity anymore. The time had come. He was going to expose the injustice and stand up for what he deserved, no matter what the cost. As Marcus and Jasmine continued their quiet investigation, the tension in the office began to shift. What had once been subtle and unspoken now felt like an undercurrent of dread. Marcus could feel the weight of what they were preparing to reveal, but what he didn't expect was how Mr. Hawkins's arrogance would start to show more cracks the closer he got to the truth. At first it was small things. Mr. Hawkins began to act more suspiciously around Marcus, as if he knew something was off. He started keeping a closer eye on Marcus, as if waiting for him to make a move. There were moments when their eyes met across the office, and Marcus could see the unease flicker in the boss's gaze. He had been comfortable in his position for far too long, dismissing others with impunity. Now there was a shift. He knew something was coming, but he couldn't yet pinpoint what. One afternoon, Marcus was reviewing a file when Mr. Hawkins walked into the break room, his eyes scanning the room like a predator watching its prey. He paused for a moment before turning to Marcus and making a casual comment. "You're really focusing on that project, huh? I hope it's all above board," he said with a smile, but there was something cold behind it. It was the first time Marcus had ever felt the full force of Hawkins's suspicion, a warning that something was about to snap. But Marcus didn't flinch. He kept his calm, not letting the boss see the plans taking shape behind his stoic expression. He had learned over the years to let Hawkins's passive-aggressive remarks slide, but now those remarks didn't bother him. The game was changing, and he wasn't playing by Hawkins's rules anymore. As Marcus gathered more evidence and reached out to more colleagues who were ready to support him, the boss grew more reckless. During meetings, Hawkins started showing his true colors even more blatantly. When a colleague, an older white man named Gary, spoke about the need for greater diversity in leadership, Hawkins's reaction was telling. His face twitched with irritation, his voice rising slightly as he dismissed Gary's suggestion. "We've already got enough diversity," Hawkins said curtly. "Don't need to complicate things." The room fell silent. Even Gary, who had been a loyal supporter of Hawkins, exchanged an uncomfortable glance with a few others in the room. Marcus could feel it too. The unease was spreading, and Hawkins was starting to unravel, losing the tight grip he once had on his position. The tension became palpable. More and more employees started to whisper among themselves, questioning what they had been witnessing for so long. While some of them still chose to keep their heads down, others, like Jasmine, sensed that the time for quiet support had passed. She had been gathering information on her own as well, secretly reaching out to the right channels, and now it was only a matter of time before the pieces of the puzzle would fit together. Marcus and Jasmine began to make their final preparations. They were ready. They had enough evidence to expose the truth and show the world what had been happening in the shadows. They knew a public confrontation was imminent, whether it happened in front of HR, at a board meeting, or with the company's leadership, they couldn't be sure. But what they did know was that the pressure was mounting. The boss, increasingly on edge, started to act even more dismissive and arrogant. In a meeting a few days later, Marcus could see Hawkins's anger boil over as he snapped at another employee for a simple mistake, something that had never warranted such an outburst before Hawkins's behavior was becoming erratic, his facade cracking further each day. The tension was building to a breaking point. It was clear that something had to give. And Marcus? He was getting closer to bringing it all to light. The audience could feel it. The showdown was coming, and the walls around Hawkins' power were crumbling. But the question remained, would the truth come out in time? Would karma be served before it was too late? The day Marcus had been waiting for had finally arrived, but even he couldn't have predicted just how quickly things would come to a head. The tension that had been building for weeks exploded in one final showdown, a moment that would change everything. It started when Marcus, supported by Jasmine and a few other courageous co-workers, gathered all their evidence and submitted it to the company's Human Resources Department. The mountain of documentation, emails, witness statements, recordings of subtle racist remarks, and the clear pattern of discrimination left no room for doubt. HR couldn't ignore it anymore. The truth was undeniable. But as word spread about the investigation, Mr. Hawkins's facade began to crumble. At first he tried to downplay the allegations, denying everything with the same arrogance that had served him well in the past. However, it didn't take long for his usual tactics to backfire. Colleagues who had once feared speaking out now came forward with their own stories of his bias. The cracks in his armor were wide open, and the company was forced to take action. On the morning of the big meeting where the decision would be made, Marcus sat anxiously in his office, his heart pounding. He knew that this was the moment everything could change. He had done his part. Now it was up to the company to do theirs. When the meeting started, the air was thick with anticipation. HR had gathered everyone involved, and Mr. Hawkins sat at the head of the table, a defiant look on his face, though his hands trembled ever so slightly. He tried to maintain his usual cocky demeanor, but it was clear to everyone that he was unraveling. The HR representative, a senior manager named Karen, started the meeting by laying out the evidence. One by one, the instances of Hawkins's unfair treatment were displayed. The room grew silent as the evidence piled up, and it became impossible for Hawkins to deny what was right in front of him. Then came the moment Marcus had been waiting for. Karen turned to him, her voice steady but firm. "Marcus, we've reviewed all the evidence, and we can't ignore the blatant bias in Mr. Hawkins's actions. This company does not stand for discrimination." Hawkins's face turned pale. He stammered, trying to protest, but his words were lost in the weight of the truth. As Karen continued, his downfall became inevitable. "Effective immediately," Karen said. "Mr. Hawkins will be placed on indefinite leave while we conduct a further investigation. We will be taking the necessary actions based on our findings, and we cannot allow behavior like this to continue in the workplace." For a moment, the room was still, the only sound the sharp inhale of everyone around them. But Marcus's heart swelled with a sense of relief that almost felt too good to be true. He had seen this moment in his mind countless times, but now that it was happening, it felt like a dream. The board members, too, nodded in agreement, and whispers of approval spread throughout the room. The wheels of justice were turning, and Hawkins's reign of bias was finally over. However, the story didn't end there. Just as the room started to clear, Karen turned to Marcus and Jasmine, a smile breaking through her usual professionalism. "Marcus," she said, "we've been reviewing your work and your dedication to the company. You've shown resilience and strength in the face of adversity, and we can't ignore that any longer. We'd like to offer you the promotion that you deserve." The words hit Marcus like a wave of emotion. It wasn't just about the promotion. It was about everything he had fought for, everything he had endured. This moment was the culmination of all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, and the painful rejections. It wasn't just a win for him. It was a win for everyone who had been held back by systemic bias, and a message that justice could prevail. As Marcus shook hands with Karen, he glanced at Jasmine, who was beaming with pride. The room had been divided, but now, with Hawkins's departure, there was a sense of unity, of righting a wrong that had lingered for far too long. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had tried to hold him down, the one who had arrogantly believed he was untouchable, had fallen from his perch. Karma had struck, and it had struck hard. The weeks following Mr. Hawkins's departure were a whirlwind. Marcus was still processing the incredible turn of events, the overwhelming relief of justice finally being served, the weight lifting off his shoulders, and the sudden change in the office atmosphere. The company had taken action, and Hawkins was no longer a part of it. But now it was time for Marcus to step into a new chapter of his life. The promotion that had once felt so out of reach was now his. Yet, despite everything that had happened, Marcus didn't feel the rush of victory he had imagined. There was no grand celebration, no public acknowledgement of his triumph. The recognition was quiet, subdued. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about proving it to himself. Marcus walked into his new office for the first time, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The space was small but comfortable, with a desk stacked with papers and a view of the bustling city skyline. It was the promotion he had worked for, the one he had earned, but there was no sense of gloating in the air. He didn't feel the need to boast or show off. In fact, there was a quiet humility in the way he took his seat at the desk, as if to say, this was meant to be. His colleagues, who had once watched him struggle under the shadow of Hawkins's discrimination, now greeted him with a new respect. They admired his resilience, his ability to endure, and most of all, his quiet strength. Jasmine, his closest ally, was the first to congratulate him, but even her words were soft, knowing that this wasn't a victory that called for loud celebrations. "You earned this, Marcus," she said, her smile genuine but humble. "I'm proud of you." Marcus nodded, a simple smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thanks, Jasmine. It's been a long road, but I'm glad I didn't give up." As the days passed, Marcus threw himself into his work with the same dedication he had always had. The promotion wasn't the finish line, it was just another milestone in his journey. He knew the real victory wasn't in the title or the office, it was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had been done, that the system, flawed as it was, had been forced to acknowledge his worth. And while the weight of Hawkins's years of injustice would never truly disappear, Marcus had come out stronger because of it. When he received his first real project as the new manager, it wasn't with the sense of entitlement that some might have expected. Instead, Marcus approached it with a sense of purpose, knowing that now, more than ever, he had the power to make a difference, not just for himself, but for others who would face the same struggles he had. The office became a different place. The culture was changing, slowly but surely. There was still work to be done, but Marcus felt a sense of pride in knowing that his efforts had made a real impact, even if it wasn't always visible. In quiet moments, Marcus would reflect on how far he had come, how much he had endured, and how, despite everything, he had never lost sight of who he was and what he stood for. There was no need for grand celebrations. The true reward was the quiet, hard-earned success that spoke louder than any words ever could. As Marcus sat in his office that evening, the city lights twinkling just beyond his window, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The road to this moment had been long, filled with challenges, rejection, and pain. Yet, through it all, he had never lost his sense of purpose or his belief that hard work and integrity would eventually win out. His story wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been held back because of the color of their skin, the ones who had been overlooked and denied opportunities. It was about those who had faced adversity and felt like the odds were stacked against them. Marcus's journey proved that, even in the face of injustice, there was always a way forward. He had fought for what was right, and through that fight, he had shown others that change was possible. That no matter how deep the system of inequality might run, there were people who would stand up, speak out, and create ripples of change that could shift the tide. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always quick. But the truth was, Marcus knew now that success wasn't just about titles or promotions. It was about perseverance, about staying true to who you were, and about never giving up, no matter how hard the journey might seem. And sometimes, when the system seemed too broken to fix, karma would step in. It would find a way to balance the scales and make sure justice was served, even when it felt like the world was working against you. As he looked out over the city, Marcus smiled to himself. The road ahead would still have its challenges. There would still be people who would try to tear others down, but he knew that no matter what, he had already won the most important battle, the battle for his own dignity, his own success, and his belief that, in the end, justice always finds its way.